My guest today is Melvin Gravely II. Now, Mel is the majority owner and CEO of Triversity Construction, a commercial construction company in Cincinnati, Ohio. And as one of the largest construction companies in the region, it is a consistent member of the Deloitte 100 list of the largest privately owned companies. An active business and civic leader who has chaired the board of the Cincinnati Regional Chamber of Commerce, Gravely served on the board of the United Way, was a founding board member of the Cincinnati Regional Economic Development Initiative, and vice chairperson of ArtsWave, the largest community arts fund in the nation. He co-chaired the Cincinnati Regional Business Committee, a group of 100 middle market CEOs working collectively toward meaningful civic action. He is also a board member of several private companies. Mel earned a BS in computer science from Mount Union University, an MBA from Kent State University, and a PhD from the Union Institute and University. He has written 8 business books. He is the father of 3 adult children and married to Chandra Webb Gravely. They have 1 granddaughter. And today we chat about his latest book, Dear White Friend, which has an objective to provide balance and practical insight on the issues of race. Now, I met Mel from my close friend, Paul Spiegelman, from the Small Giants community. I also saw Mel deliver his Dear White Friend talk at the Small Giants Summit in Detroit, Michigan in April of 2022. He inspired not just me, but the entire audience, which incidentally was made up of 99.5% white people. Now, I promise you'll learn a lot from our chat today, and warning, you will likely want to take action. So please enjoy my chat with Mel. Mel, thanks for taking time to chat with me today.
Rob, I am excited. I've been looking forward to this for weeks. So thanks for having me.
I have too. We were just chatting a moment ago. I saw you talk at the Small Giants Summit in April of 2022. And thank you for that. It was so inspirational. And the entire crowd, as I looked around, and I've shared this with you before, I could just tell the message resonating with so many people there. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. And again, I just keep getting these opportunities that friends are saying, hey, come speak to my group. And I'm just so honored that people trust me enough to put me in front of their friends.
Yeah.
And I feel called to do what I'm doing right now. And so although it's different than what I experience in my day job, it's what I'm called to do right now.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Good for following it. I always like to start with a quote, and then I'd like to get your feedback on it.
All right.
This one goes like this. You don't stick a knife in a man's back 9 inches and then pull it out 6 inches and say you're making progress. No matter how much respect, no matter how much recognition whites showed towards me, as far as I'm concerned, as long as it is not shown to every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me. And that's a quote from Malcolm X. And I'm wondering what comes to your mind when you hear that.
Yeah. Well, I think first, Malcolm X, I think, was miscategorized during his time. And I think upon reflection, I think his language was pointed, but his message of bringing us together was a little bit more about bringing us together than I think he got credit for. And so that quote resonates with me in a lot of ways, because I have been supported by many, many people, white and other. And but I think there's a culture in our country that we just got to be willing to acknowledge. And I think that's what Malcolm X is saying in that quote.
I was curious, in your book, you reference different people, and I might have missed it, but I didn't see you reference Martin Luther King. And that was just a curiosity to me. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could share a bit why.
It was definitely not intentional, but you're not the first one to note it. And so it wasn't intentional. I will say I've got like amazing respect for Martin Luther King and his ability to bring our nation to a place of recognition, to a place of change. I think we've got a lot to do, but it was not intentional. I will say this, though. I believe that calling of Martin Luther King's name at times is a signal that our work is done. And I remind people that Martin Luther King negotiated what the country would accept during the civil rights time. And but it was a negotiation. It was a give and take. It was removing the knife, 3 inches, but not all the way. It was a lot of that horse trading that we're seeing today in our politics. And I'm not saying that that's not to diminish what it was, but let's not mistake it for equality in that moment, because it was not.
Yeah, thank you for that. Now, you talk about it being difficult for some to hear new perspectives in your book, especially if they don't fit into our current belief systems. And I'm just curious, and I want to hold up your book for those that are watching on the YouTube channel. Dear White Friend, what are you trying to accomplish with this book?
Yeah, well, there's probably 2 things that are top of mind for me. One, as an outcome, I'd like to be able to have a more productive conversation about race, which means we've all got to get more comfortable with it. We've got to get more open to candid conversation. We've got to not water it down, but cool it down. So that's number one. Second, and this is the journey I'd like to see us get on, is individuals, organizations, communities being intentional about closing the gap that I talk so much about in the book. Intentional activities, intentional resources allocated, intentional language, just more intentional about closing the gap between us. And I think that is our opportunity long-term for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I want to just talk a little bit about you specifically, your career. You started in sales, I think, at IBM, if I'm not mistaken. And then later, did you acquire the company that you're CEO of today, Triversity Construction?
Yeah, there were a bunch of other things in between when I worked at IBM and now, most of them entrepreneurial. I ran a company or 2 for other people for a while. I was a college professor for a while. And then I acquired this company in 2009. So that is correct. This was an ongoing company. It was about 4 years old when we got controlling interest.
Is there anything to the name? I've been curious about the name Triversity.
Yeah, there is. And again, I didn't name it, but at the beginning, there were 2 things. One, the founding brain behind this was a CEO of a large construction company in Cincinnati. His name is Pete Strange, and the company is Messer Construction. Pete Strange wondered aloud, why can there not be a large scale African-American led construction company? He, in his mind, he thought $100 million. And so he got 2 of his friends, African-Americans, and they started a company called Triversity. There were 3 owners, all owned a third. Okay. Messer Construction owned a third. One of the partners on the third, and the other one. So that's where it got the tri from. And versity, I guess, was the play on diversity. And so they rammed them together and came up with Triversity. Yes.
That makes sense. Okay.
Very, very thoughtful.
Okay. And I was somewhat surprised. Like, I didn't realize that you were such an author. You've written like 8 books at least. I went on your website, I saw 8, but on Amazon, I saw like 10 or 11 sort of things attributed to you.
Yeah.
What inspired you to start writing many years ago, actually, and start bringing your wisdom to the world?
Yeah, my wisdom. I appreciate that. There's an assumptive thing there. So I will tell you, I don't golf a lot. I don't woodwork. I don't hunt. I really don't have a hobby per se. But if I had to point to a thing that clarifies my mind, that I can do for hours on end without interruption, it's writing. And so it started with writing articles back in the early 90s. And it just hasn't stopped. And so when I was trying to figure all this race state stuff out and get my mind clear about where I was, it was kind of a natural thing for me to sit down and start writing. So
Mhm.
it's just always been a thing. I wish I had a really compelling answer for I needed to share my wisdom with the world. Honestly, I'm not sure how much wisdom I have to share, but the process of writing is good for me. It just it's just I don't know how else to say it. It's just really good for me.
Well, I appreciate your humility. I haven't read your other books, but as it relates to Dear White Friend, I think you've shared a lot of wisdom and put things in a framework that is very approachable and understandable. You know, one of the things that you write about, and I want to start getting into the book a little bit
Sure.
here, is that in the United States, you say it's whites on top, blacks on the bottom, everyone else in between. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, and this is a tough one for people to hear, particularly my white friends. But I talk a lot about the African American experience because I'm Black. But what I have discovered in the research I've done for Dear White Friend, by the way, I'm not an expert in this topic. This is not my expertise. And my PhDs in business administration with a focus on entrepreneurship. That's what I know best. But this concept is kind of the racial construct that we intentionally put in place in the United States back when we founded it. And we have negotiated around the edges, but we've pretty much kept it intact that every transition we make, it is built to keep this construct this way. The reason why I find it so important is, to me, it is inclusive. I'm not leaving anyone out. Blacks on the bottom, whites on the top, and every other, anything that's not one of those two is in between, sexual orientation, disability, and the like. The other reason why it's important is if anything we do intentionally does not intentionally include Black people, it stops before it gets to the whole construct. And you'll see disproportionate outcomes and still leaving Blacks out of it. And so even in my company here, it's a struggle for us to accept this construct, operate within it with the diversity that we've got in this company that we pride ourselves on. But that's where I got, that's what's framing it for me. And I think if people can hold that construct and acknowledge it's true, which is the hardest part, then we can begin to work on how do we make sure everyone is included as we move forward.
I appreciate in the book that you write to your white friends and state essentially that we're not racist. And I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about how you see what a racist really is.
Sure, great question. Because I get a lot of questions about how can I say that my white friends aren't racist? So to me, a racist is someone who is waking up with the intentionality and the activity to back it up to do harm to others, particularly people of color. And my white friends are not those people. I don't think I let my white friends off the hook because I do identify them as benefiting bystanders, meaning they are not intentional about propping up systems and intentional about doing harm, but they're also not trying to go out of their way to be more inclusive oftentimes and being willing to call to question what they've come to believe and breaking up systems that might be harmful. So they're not intentionally doing harm, but it's going to take more than that for us to reach a place where we really do live out the promise of America.
Yeah. What would you say white people do need to do?
Yeah. First, Rob, I always say this: get more comfortable with this topic. Like, be able to feel confident having a conversation about race. So whatever you got to do to get comfortable. If you got to read, listen to podcasts, whatever you need to do, because it's hard for us to move if we're not talking. So that's first. Get more comfortable, because what we don't need is more one group telling another group, here's what you need to do. I think we need to talk about what we need to do together. And to do that, we got to get more comfortable about it. Second, I believe in these spheres of influence, And in my simple mind, if you and I both operate with intentionality in our sphere, making sure that we increase the likelihood of opportunity and decrease the opportunity or the exposure to harm, then I think as we're operating in our spheres start to touch. And whatever you're doing starts to touch whatever I'm doing. Whoever I know in our conversations is starting to impact who you know in your conversation. And we build this new momentum as a nation that says we can talk about it better. We are acting on it more collectively. We're not waiting on government intervention. We're taking the actions that we can take. And the momentum of that changes our political structure, changes our approach to policies. But that happens as we begin to engage in it differently. So, I try not to tell people exactly what they should do because, again, I'm not an expert. But within your sphere, how do you make it more inclusive, more equitable? How are we building more relationships as we move forward? I think that is the challenge I put out to people. And I try to be consistent about it.
I had an experience a number of years ago where I was preparing to facilitate a panel, and there were 2 Black owners on the entrepreneurs on the panel and 1 white entrepreneur. In my conversations with one of the owners, this particular person was Black, and happened to be from Detroit, where I'm from. I was asking him about the culture in Detroit in particular. And he shared with me that throughout the generations and this might be broad, but I'm just sharing what he said to me, in the generations in Detroit, since the race riots, they have taught, each generation teaches the next to essentially be very cautious about white people and their intentions.
Yeah.
And I was actually, and that's just me being naive.
Right.
You know, I was like, wow, what could I do? And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that, and what could I do?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can confirm that I don't know how overt the teaching is, because you don't have to be overt in all your teachings. But if you watch your parents and your grandparents, you can see how they move, the questions they ask, the things they say no to, that make you understand, like, don't be completely trusting. There's also been a history of manipulation and exploitation that allows for that sends the antenna up even higher, right? That makes it a more present day kind of. And I've thought about minority business programs, for example, where white business owners will I'll use that term intentionally, use a minority business owner to get access to contracts because of minority business programs. And yes, the minority business owner had to say yes to that, but the manipulation is still just as true. And that is just another form of why should we trust? So what I would say is, I go back to my premise. Let's get clear about how we feel about this. Let's have better dialogue. Let's be intentional and gain the trust of friends over time. Believing that we will be friends the first time we meet is naive. Believing that I can listen to your heart and you listen to mine, and over time we can become true friends, is an opportunity that I'd like to see us create. And so, although that's true, I would imagine it's true. The narrative for white people is often just as true, where your narrative talks about violence and crime and poverty, and so I can see it going both ways. I just think that we've got to get to a place where the conversations are richer, deeper, at a heart level, and not so much firing accusations and names and falling back into our silos of communication. So Rob, that would be my probably way too long-winded answer to you.
No, not at all. Not at all. You talk about a question that we should ask over and over again, which is, why is what I see the way it is? Can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So, I hear a lot, well, what about Black on Black crime? And what about single parents? And what about?
All the what about questions, as you say.
Yes. Yeah. And by the way, what about questions are not questions, they're statements. They're really statements saying, you got a problem, I really don't, right? So go tell me about that. They're not really interested in the answer to the what about questions. So when I see something that looks dysfunctional to me, looks like it doesn't make sense, looks like someone is not acting in their own best interest using my perception, I now ask the question, Why would that be? Like, why would a person behave in the way we're watching, that we're seeing? And what I come to is usually the way they were cultured to the moment they are has guided them to that place, whether it is multiple generations of poverty or multiple generations of single moms. There's a history to why there are so many single moms. What we did in the mid 1990s around criminalization of minor drug offenses has led to a separation in family. The way the support systems are put in place, the incentives and disincentives to progress through rungs, so you lose resources when you get to a certain cliff. There's a lot of reasons. So I want to begin to understand the reasons and not vilify the person. So that's why I'm inviting people to ask, why would that be like that? Mm-hmm. Man, that's so insane to me. Why would it be that way? And I think what you'll find is there are reasons, not excuses though, because this is the difference between empathy and sympathy. We still have to do something about what we're seeing. But at least when I understand it, I can appreciate where a person is and begin to really affect that change. But imagine just for a moment, Rob, 6 generations of poverty. Like what you inherited from your parents and then from their parents and from their parents was poverty. What we see as dysfunction is really what it takes to live every day. There is no long-term plan for retirement. There is no, that's just not the planning horizon for people who live in that every day, every moment. And for us not to be empathetic around that is to be judgmental and unhealthy.
Mm-hmm. As it relates to business for a second, I heard you share that even you were trying to build a more diverse team around you. And let's just talk about business for a second. And, some of your thoughts around, the perceived challenges of, I just need to find an amazing person, whatever they are, it doesn't matter. I need it yesterday. And being patient around and intentional, as you say, around doing that.
Yeah. It is, our company, one of the 5 company values is we value the power of diversity. We don't value diversity for its sake. We value the power that it brings. Yes. Therefore, we've got to be diverse and we've got to leverage that diversity into something that's meaningful for our customers, for us, for our community. Like that's where the power comes from. In order to do that, you've got to be intentional about hiring and development and retention and all of the things that matter to that. It does not make it easy. We just had a powwow internally a week ago where we had to recommit ourselves to the importance, not that it was really nice for us to have, but that was imperative that we do it better than anyone else on the planet. And so it kicks off a series of things in us. Looking at job design, because we're not getting enough of the kids coming out of professional construction management programs. So we're going to start looking at job design. They all have to have 4-year degrees from a leading engineering school, or can they go to a 2-year school and come out and have a different title and a different kind of work, which opens up a different pool. Everything's got to be on the table because it's imperative that we win, because we have decided that the power of diversity. But sometimes it goes too far. Yeah. My team runs off and they hire people and don't hold them accountable, and that's not what we want either, right? And so even we struggle and fail sometimes at what we're trying.
Mm-hmm. But the message overall is be intentional about it and be okay with the failing, get better next time.
Absolutely.
Because there is such power in the diversity of a group.
Yeah, and I think that my peers will find that to be true.
Yeah.
They're just not as relentlessly committed to it as we are. But if they were, what I believe they would find, and what we've evidenced, is it creates an energy that's an intangible product that shows up in the world. And quite honestly, we're trying to build the world we want to live in. That's really all we're trying to do. We got people here that vote this way or that way, or believe in this or that. And all we say is, if you live by the 5 values of this company, you can work here. And that's a special place that we're not judging who you voted for, whether you got a vaccine or not. I wish you would have, but if you didn't, you can still work here, because that's what we're trying to create, a world we want to live in.
Yeah. Yeah. You were talking about that 6 generations of poverty.
Yeah.
It brought to mind the story, or you share a study, I believe it was, utilizing a Monopoly game. And I know this is like the thing that seems to resonate most, as you've told me in our prior discussions. Share that study with us.
Yeah. There was a study out of and I don't have the study in front of me, but it's referenced in the book, out of a college in North Carolina, where the professor used the Monopoly game to show her students who were all pursuing degrees in education what equity meant. And so she took 9 students and she divided them into 3 groups. And we all know Monopoly, so we know it's, you all get the same money. You gotta, you spend it, you roll the dice, you move around, you get $200 every time you pass go. But she let 3 of the students start at the beginning of the game. For 45 minutes, they played Monopoly. They bought houses, they bought hotels, they did their thing, they collected $200. Then she let the next group start. Of course, when they started, there were already houses purchased and some hotels, but there was still some opportunity, so they could play the game. They played for 45 more minutes. An hour and a half after the first group started, the third group started. What they found was all the land had been purchased. It had hotels and houses on it. Every time they landed on the property, they had to pay rent. They still got $200 to pass go. They still started the game with the same money, but yet somehow this game was not equitable for them because of when they started. And that is how we built our nation. And if we don't intentionally do something about it, it will permanently be that way, because the gap is so significant. And actually, in a lot of areas, including wealth, the gap is getting bigger. We'll never close that gap. Mm-hmm. One last thing I'll throw out, Ram, and you mentioned the inheritance of poverty. Mm-hmm. Almost half of all Black families, 48% of all Black families inherit poverty. That means they have multiple generations of poverty, compared to 7% of whites. So when I say whites on top, Blacks on the bottom, everyone else in between, that's the data that drives that home, that says, wow, that is a start.
Yeah. Rate. Just like some might inherit better circumstances than others, this is the same thing, but the complete opposite. And it's so hard. Just like that great opportunity that you inherit, you also inherit, lack of opportunity.
Absolutely. And it's meaningful in its starting place.
Yeah.
In its ability to navigate the social construct of a family that even instills hard work and get up and go to school, and performance in school and good behavior. All of that's bound up in where we start. And again, that's the difference between sympathy and empathy. Understanding that will inform us, and I hope give us a sense of empathy. I am not saying that whites and others don't work hard, that they didn't earn what they got. And I get some of that pushback. I earned this. I didn't start from means. Here's what I am saying. No matter where you started, you did not have the institutional constraint of being Black. So even if I was born with some privilege, there are things in our nation, biases, existing kind of soundtracks that take my situation and add a bit of context to it. And so I don't want people to believe that they didn't work hard, they didn't make good decisions, they kept their nose to the grindstone, they did all the right things. And I'm not saying that that's not true. I'm saying that you didn't have the element of race piled on top of that, bringing extra weight to it, or headwinds at your pursuit.
Yeah.
So that's really what I'm trying to articulate.
Like if you're a data person and you like numbers, there were some stats that you showed that are pretty remarkable. Like if there was equity, as you say, which I want to ask you about in a second, then these numbers might be different. But home ownership, Blacks 43%, whites 73%.
Yeah.
Like why wouldn't it be 73?
Yeah, and now the implications of that home ownership
Yeah.
is 67% of our wealth, Americans' wealth, is tied up in homes. So if
Yeah.
we've got a 30% gap, we've got a gap in not just stability of homes, but wealth as well. And there's a history to how we got to that gap that people, we can't, history doesn't start today. We don't get to live history forward. There's implications of all the stuff we've done. And we're just not allowed to say, no, I don't like that part. Let's start today. I'm like, well, I wish we could. But I'm living with the implications of yesterday and trying to make tomorrow different.
So talk about this idea where you say, it's more about equity than equality.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about equality.
Right. Well, the Monopoly game is a perfect example. So, I could argue that the Monopoly game, the way she played it out in her experiment, by the way, the third group was totally demoralized, right? They didn't want to play that game, right? Who wants to keep going?
I know the feeling.
Yeah, well, it happens in Monopoly a lot. Yeah, well, you just don't have any opportunity. But, that game was equitable. I'm sorry, it was equal. Everyone got the same amount of money at the start. Everyone played by the same rules. Everyone got $200 when they passed go. Everyone got a chance to roll the dice when it was their turn. It was equal. Yeah. The problem is in the context of how the game was executed, it was not equitable. And the gap that was created, there was no way to close it. And the difference between equality and equity is the fact that we've got this gap that is not closable without intentionality. And so think of equity, at least in the short run or the medium run, of their equitable actions, things that help close that gap. Equity is a North Star of, it ought to be 73-73 on home ownership, or 57-57, or whatever number you want, but it ought to be equitable. We ought to have equitable outcomes based on the same kind of inputs. And that's the world that we have an opportunity to build, but we intentionally built a different one. That's the point.
Now you share a story, a personal story where, you're kind of comparing how easy it can be sometimes to fall into certain thought patterns. And this is a story about yourself where you were in Charlotte, North Carolina, and you were driving in a really nice neighborhood, happens to be called the Dilworth neighborhood. And can you tell a little bit about that story, what you were thinking at that moment?
Yeah. During COVID, our youngest son graduated from college, took a job in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so his parents were down visiting him once. And keep in mind the context of what's going on. It's a beautiful day, by the way, in Charlotte, North Carolina, and that neighborhood is beautiful. And but there's a lot of social unrest. I'm in the midst of finishing this book up, so on my mind is all this stuff. And my wife, God bless her, is just in the car, just silent, and she can tell I'm thinking. And we're riding through this neighborhood, and I'm seeing all white people, by the way. I didn't see maybe some people working in the yard that were, service providers that were not white, but white neighborhood. They're walking their dogs. They're chatting on the corner. They're running, jogging. It's that kind of neighborhood where it looked like no one had a care in the world. And I began to judge them. They don't care. They're just so privileged. They have no idea what's going on. And I had to catch myself because, first of all, I didn't know any of those people. And so how dare I judge them? They could have all kind of things going on in their lives, and but it's that easy to get caught up in your own stuff and project it onto others. And this idea of not judging others is one I've worked really, really hard on. I try not to use the word should and ought, because when I say you should or ought do something, that is me based on my stuff telling you what I believe you ought to be doing. And I try not to use those words, which helps me not tell people what I think they should be doing. But it's tough. And so that's the story, though, when I was writing, my wife and I were in Charlotte.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I just have to compliment you about the book is, you call yourself out and others out on, different things that help somebody like myself who's white and I'm trying to learn. You bring some comfort level to me being able to learn and maybe not have some feelings prop up that I might have had in other situations. So I
Well, the one
appreciate that.
yeah, well, I appreciate your appreciation of it. The one you didn't mention was when I saw these African American males on the corner in the middle of the darn day, and apparently not working.
Yeah, that's true.
I judged them too.
Yes, you did. That's right.
And I never once assumed any positive. They could work on the night shift. I don't know, right? They could be independently wealthy, and therefore they don't have to work. They could be in graduate school and just chilling because today they don't have class. I didn't assume any of those. I assumed they were lazy, able-bodied men who were on the corner chilling, and I judged them, and that's not okay either.
Yeah. That was such a great example. I really appreciate you. I missed that, but I remember that story. And I thought that is so great what you're saying and acknowledging that in yourself. Talk about these two pillars of equity that you write about, acknowledge and decide, and how these are in our way in America.
Yeah. Let me see if I can articulate it clearly. Let's start with acknowledge. What I have found is even some of my best white friends want to downplay our history. They want to soften the implications that we face today. They want to make it more about individuals than they want to do about systems. So in my mind, they are unwilling to acknowledge not just where we are, but how we got here. And if you will not acknowledge where we are and how we got here, then it's a no starter. Now you're nipping around the edges. You're trying to, at times this shows up in virtue signaling where you just want to, make it seem like you care. But the lack of acknowledgement, the lack of ability to acknowledge we intentionally built a nation this way is a problem. Because once you acknowledge anything that you want to change, it's easier to work on it. You might have picked up a few pounds over COVID. You got to acknowledge it. Hey, I picked up a few pounds. I might need to cut back on some of the things I'm doing and increase my exercise. But until you acknowledge it, it's difficult. So that's the acknowledgement part. And I have found that my friends struggle with it mightily. As a matter of fact, my new revelation is they accept it, they go back to their silos, and they get talked out of it because the narrative is so deeply rooted that they then to like, no, yeah, you're right. Like it isn't that bad. And, people just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and there's no systemic stuff going on here. They get talked out of it. So that's my new revelation, that if you don't get a steady diet of awareness, if you don't deepen your roots, that you're kind of like a tree in this thing where you sprouted up new knowledge, but it gets blown over because there's no roots to it.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of friends that can't keep the acknowledgement that they discovered. And the second is to decide. And I still remember talking to a friend who said, I get it. I'm still trying to figure out what's my role in fixing it. Great question. The decision part is decide that, and I use I use Malcolm X as a quote here. I say we've got to decide by whatever means necessary, which is a quote attributed to Malcolm X. And in his context, he meant any means necessary. And I think people thought he meant violence and blah, blah, blah. I think, as I say in the book, if you're my friend, I don't mean violence. And I don't mean anything close to it. But I do mean that it can't be too expensive. And it can't be too unfair to whites. And it can't be, and it can't be, and it can't be. Because if it is, we're not going to make much progress. So that's what I mean by acknowledge and decide. If we decide our issues with race must be fixed, our nation will struggle to move forward if we can't get our mojo back around race, then all the rhetoric I hear about it costs too much, or it is, anti-racism, or reverse racism, or it is unfair to white people, those won't be issues anymore because we'll be moving toward an equitable path and we'll have decided.
Yeah. You talk a little bit about history. I'm curious your thoughts on things like statues that are in parks or, around the country. How do you feel about that? And especially during the pandemic when there was a lot of, Birmingham, Alabama, they were pulling one down. And yeah, what are your thoughts on that part of our history?
This is a complex one for me.
Okay.
I'm going to try to simplify it and keep myself out of trouble at the same time. All right. What I will say is that symbols matter.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at the timing of when most of these statues went up, they trouble me. These weren't statues that went up in the late 1800s. These were statues that went up in 1960, and so that concerns me. Mm-hmm. I believe we need all of it to make progress. So is that top of my list? No. Changing Uncle Ben's rice box was not on the top of my list. Aunt Jemima, changing that branding was not on the top of my list. What I would have suggested is keep the name Aunt Jemima, just make sure 60% of the content comes from Black-owned companies. I'd be fine with that change. Mm-hmm. So I'm more into the substantive things that can change the dynamics of our communities and our businesses. But I do recognize that symbols matter, and I do. But my fear is that we lower a statue and don't change our hearts, minds, knowledge, or approaches. Mm-hmm. We change the brand, but we don't increase the opportunity for people of color to participate in the supply chain. That's what worries me a little bit. But I think we need them all, and both is what I would say.
Okay. Talk a bit about a term that you call actions of intentionality, AOI.
Yeah, I would say to you, you would have never known my name if it weren't for a series of actions of intentionality in my life. That means someone intentionally saying that the natural path for you, we're going to disrupt it. Mm-hmm. It wasn't that my path was going to prison. I wasn't on that kind of trip, but my path was going down a typical, completely Black neighborhood. Here's the school you'll go to. Here's the next school. Here's the next school. Here's the people you will know. Here's the level of education, the quality of education that you'll get. That's how this will be your first job. And people along the way disrupted that. My parents disrupted where I went to middle school. There was a local college in the area, and along with a corporation by the name of Timken Company, who created a special program for minorities in technology that put me on a track to get employment early and learn technology. It was a special program for minorities. When I got to IBM, I tell a story in the book. 7 people joined the company that day. 5 of them were Black. 2 of them were transfers. The 2 white ones were transfers. Actually, that's not true. 1 white was a transfer, 1 Black. My point is that it was clear to me that IBM was being intentional about who they were hiring. The company I run today, I mentioned earlier that Pete Strange, CEO emeritus of Messer Construction, was intentional about creating this opportunity. Some people think these actions of intentionality diminish me, make me less talented, and they don't. I still had to show up and perform. I did really well at IBM. It's top of my class in training. I did really well my years there, multiple 100% clubs. I've done well at all the steps, but the opportunities, there was no natural way for me to engage in those opportunities if it wasn't for actions of intentionality to put me there. Mm-hmm. So I can't use affirmative action because that's a negative term, but I'm an affirmative action baby. I'm proud of that. I think that the country's investment in me and investment in that approach, I think that the return is more than equal the investment. Mm-hmm.
So you write about the uncomfortable conversation of paying back or reparations, which would be direct payments to Blacks. And I'm wondering if you can share your thoughts on this and how you feel we could do this, what it might mean to the Black community, both mentally and financially.
Yeah. So I've got, this one was equally split with my Black and white friends. Nobody thought I should write about this. So I want to be clear. And even I, going into this, did not support reparations. And what I realized is I didn't believe that we'd ever do it. That's different than believing that we should. So let me start with why I think it's got to happen. The gap is so big. that were hundreds of years of closing the gap. That's number one. Number two, if you lay out the case for reparations and you talk about the manipulation and use of Black people over time, and you apply any dollar figure to that, it's an egregiously easy decision to make that you need to pay something. Like you had all this free labor. Then you had Jim Crow where you just decimated any Black wealth. And so to me, the case for it is easy to make. How you determine, so people get hung up on the how, but at least that's what they try to use. They say, well, you know, these weren't the enslaved people and I wasn't the enslaver and blah, 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 blah. Okay. The real truth is I don't believe anyone is willing to give Black people money. And because they, A, don't believe that they'll use it for means that close the gap. And B, they believe it comes from them. Here's my problem. We just transferred trillions of dollars of wealth from our government to our private sector through various payroll protection programs and tax credits. Trillions of dollars got transferred. And 99% of the money went to white people. And no one questioned whether we should. So my question is it really about the money or is it really about Black people? And I can't figure it out. Now, I'm not making it that simple. I'm just simply saying, don't tell me we haven't done it. Don't tell me we've not given that. Please don't tell me that. Tell me you don't want to. Tell me you don't believe they'll use it. Tell me you think they'll buy gym shoes. And then my argument is, even if they buy gym shoes with the money, whatever the stereotype is that you think folks will use, well, that's good for the economy, so you get the money back. So it's still a good thing for the economy. I think it's got to happen because I think of the single mom with 2 kids who lives in a school system that is underperforming. And this money is the down payment she needs to move to my neighborhood or your neighborhood and put her kids in a public school system that give them a chance to be surrounded by a different set of people, that be educated at a different level, which gives them access to college and maybe scholarships that they're not going to get potentially in the other school system. It could break the cycle of poverty for families. That's the vision I get when I think about reparations. But listen, this is the least talked about part of my book. There have been a couple of articles written about them, none of them positive. Very few people were bold enough as you did to ask me about it because this is pretty much dead on arrival as a conversation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But my question back to people is, okay, you don't like reparations. Nope, got it. I do understand that. I struggle with it myself. Then what is the answer to close that gap?
Yeah. You got me thinking a lot about it, and I actually asked some people about it, and, things that I heard back were what you mentioned. I'm not sure how it will get spent by individuals. And I thought to myself, well, that's not really our concern, how they spend, how this person spends.
It's not your money, right?
Yeah. So that's B is I'd rather see it go this way. So I'd rather see it invested in education, for example, improving education in less fortunate areas. Yeah. But again, that is that person who, and I ask white people, so there's white people's solution to Black people's challenge. Right. So I was really struggling with the answers, and I think it's an interesting thing to consider for us.
Well, and I want to be clear to your audience. I didn't call for reparations necessarily. Yeah. But I did call for the study of there's legislation. Yeah. In our Congress right now. Yeah. That says let's study it. Yeah. Right. And let's let smart people study it. Let's get a real robust answer to what we think the implications will be, and at least have a dialogue about it. But right now, we're not even doing that.
Well, one question I had for you along those lines is a little different than what's going on in the federal government, but you reference that Georgetown University is doing this with 272, I think, people right now. And I was just curious, and you might not have the answer, but I don't think it was in your book, how that's going.
Yeah. Well, if I was writing the next version of the book, I'd have to update it. Georgetown is struggling to keep
Okay.
their commitment.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. The
and
financial commitment part of it.
financial commitment
Okay.
of it, and so that troubles me as well. See, that's part. I mean, we've made reparations promises before
Yeah.
in this country. We just struggle to make them work.
Mm-hmm.
We struggle to keep our word.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you can talk to American Indians, you can talk, Chinese Americans, and you can talk to Japanese Americans, I should say.
Yeah, right.
We've just struggled to keep our promises, and it appears that Georgetown might be struggling to.
Yeah.
But the details of that, I didn't dig deep into. I saw an article or two. So I hope anyone from Georgetown, please go do your own research on that to make sure you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you write that there is just us. And I really appreciate that, because it's true. I mean, we have to come together as a society, and get serious about this. I'm watching a documentary right now about George Carlin. He's a comedian, and they're showing clips of the late 60s. And honestly, if you change the color a little bit, it looks like exactly what's been going on the last couple of years.
Yep.
That's 50 years.
Yeah.
It makes no sense.
It doesn't. And I do say it's just us, because people were asking me, and they keep asking me, what's the solution?
Right.
And there is no single solution to this. There's a multi-pronged, individualized approach to this that over time allows us to win as a nation. And it's just us, because it's just you and me and our friends and our engagement that allows us to get there. And I wish I had a simple answer, but I didn't build where we are, but I own where we are. And I'm looking for those who are willing to own it with me and do their part in their sphere and let it touch my sphere. And then we can go together and impact kind of some of the systems-based stuff. But if we don't, Ram, I think our country's going to lose our mojo. We can keep talking about make America great again, or go back to reclaim America. I keep hearing that. And I always ask, make America great again for who? When was it great for me? And so I think it can be great for all of us, but we've got to go back to the founding fathers' intention, although they've struggled to do it right. Mm-hmm. But if we don't all have an inalienable right, then our nation is not living up to its promise. And I also think we're going to struggle to move forward. We're just going to struggle to be a world power, to lead in innovation and entrepreneur, because we're going to be internally fighting each other and taking energy away from what we can do collectively.
Yeah, that's right. Let's be humble. I mean, we're a great country, but we have lots of things, this one at the forefront, that we need to address properly and thoughtfully. Let's get on it.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, I am a proud American. I believe in the United States of America.
Yes, you are.
And I believe in its promise. And I want to be in a world where we're grasping for that promise. And you can tell when someone's trying. That's what I want to try to do here.
Yeah. All right. What did I leave out? Is there anything I missed or that you'd like to share that I didn't ask you?
You were pretty darn thorough.
Okay. Good.
What I would say is occasionally I'm writing some op-eds. Mm-hmm. So I'd love people to check those out at our website, dearwhitefriend.com. Call them The Objective. So you go there and you'll look for The Objective, and occasionally, so because what I found is, as I said, that my friends, they acknowledge it, and then they struggle to keep the acknowledgement. And so I'm trying to feed them a steady diet of more information, more practical. For example, I wrote an article on CRT because I kept hearing this language. I thought
critical race theory.
Critical race theory, yes, critical race theory, and just a total misunderstanding of what the heck it is. And so I wrote an op-ed about that. It got published in the Inquirer. So I'll continue to do things like that over time. Nothing that I'm committing to every week or every month, but they can check those things out. Please share this book. with others. Please put me in front of the right audiences so that we can share this message. I think I use the words, I'm called to do this. I'm called to do this. I get worn out by it. But every time I get worn out, I get a call from someone like you or someone like Paul, who we both know from Small Giants.
Yeah.
And it reminds me that the work's important. And it reinvigorates me to do it again. And so I just recommitted to another year of saying I'm going to make this 60% of what I'm doing, and my company is allowing me to do that because it matters. So if your listeners have the right groups that are in my lane and need me there, we're going to try to do as many as we can.
I love it. I mean, it's I appreciate that, and you are called to do it because you got a serious business you're running over there, and you certainly could use a little free time and focus on that, but you're choosing to go where you're called, and I appreciate that. And the book is Dear White Friend, and I highly, highly recommend it. And also, you didn't mention, but I wanted to mention that at your website, dearwhitefriend.com, there is a discussion workbook or PDF that you could download, and you can have everyone read the book. You could go through sort of a setup that you create and then go through the questions together. And it's fantastic. And I think every leadership team, if you are in business and you're listening to this, do that exercise.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, thanks for mentioning it.
Yeah.
And that document gives you all the prep and the watch outs and all that stuff. And we put a lot of time into making it. I should have mentioned it.
It is good. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all free. So please use it.
It's all free. Yeah. So, and we'll have all your links on the show notes. So if you missed anything for the listeners, it'll all be there in the show notes. And Mel, I just really am so grateful to you for taking time to chat with me today, and for, this purpose that you have here, being called to do it. We're all going to be the beneficiary of it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate your assistance in spreading the word. And
absolutely.
I love the work you do and the touch you're adding to this. So thank you again. And I look forward to seeing you in Detroit. I'm going to try to get up there for the next Small Giants for sure. But but I'll look you up.
All right. I love it. You always have a friend up in Detroit. So thanks, Mel.
Thank you.
And to all the loyal listeners, as always, I wish you much love and gratitude.